great to see you guys. Travis, Dave, what's going on? How you guys
Hi,
feeling?
Jared. Doing good. Actually, I'm getting over pneumonia, if I'm being completely transparent, but I'm fine.
You
Oh
sound
no.
all right.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Not too
got
much
something.
coughing anymore. So,
Look, spring training is 2 weeks away. 2 weeks? Yeah, it's 2 weeks away.
mm-hmm.
Crazy. I'm not prepared. Doesn't feel like it. I'm staring out my window in New York and it's like 30 degrees. Where are you guys? Where do you guys live?
I'm in Cleveland, and the lake was frozen last week, so it's just thawing out. Got a little warmer this week, so yeah, it's hard to believe pitchers and catchers are right around the corner, but that's welcome news.
It is
I'm in
so.
Kansas City, also AL Central territory, I guess.
Oh my
So,
goodness, I'm the big bad AL East coming in to run this panel with two AL Central guys. So maybe that's fitting. Look, guys, we're here to talk about rule changes. I think the title of this is MLB rule changes that need to happen. This is obviously a topic I've written about a lot, topic you guys have written about a lot. I think every single baseball fan in the world has had some thoughts about rules and how the game can be better. But I always find it so interesting is how reluctant baseball often is to go and make changes, right? We see other sports, the NBA, the NFL, they love going under the hood, tinkering, making changes to the rules. In baseball, a little more conservative, I think. Of course, a couple years ago, made one of the biggest changes you've ever seen with the pitch clock. It's had an enormous impact on the product. But I think we all would agree they're not done. And there's probably more coming. And we are here to talk about some things that they should be thinking about, maybe some things that you've heard MLB's thinking about, maybe some things that only we think would be interesting. I'm sure we all have some sort of wacky ideas. And I think the best way to go about thinking about this is think about rule changes in two sort of chunks. There's the rule changes on the field, so ways the game's actually played, and then there's sort of the bigger picture rules, things like the economic system of baseball, sort of the rules governing the business of baseball. And I think both are under a lot of scrutiny right now. We're going to see a lot of changes, I think, in both of these arenas, probably in the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And this is a good place to start. So I think a good beginning point, right? It's something that we know is coming. We know that this spring, Major League Baseball is going to be testing some version of a automatic strike zone challenge concept, right? We know that's coming, starting this spring. It happened in the minor leagues last year. We all have seen the clip of Paul Skeens in AAA doing that challenge. We're going to see it in spring training, not in the regular season in 25, but I feel like it's moving that direction. So why don't we start there? Travis and Dave, where are you guys now on the robot ump, as they say?
the first thing that I want to make sure that I'm not certain about as far as how this is going to be done is, are we sure that the strike zones will be related to the actual size of the player? Like, is it just kind of put out there, this is a strike zone from this point to that point? Are they, when they measure the people, are they getting in their stance? I mean, maybe that's like too detailed, but like, I just envision Aaron Judge, who seems to, I don't know if it's true, but he sure seems to get the short end of the stick on the strike zone balls at the ankles and so forth, called strikes. Is it going to be fair in that way? Is it going to be realistic? Otherwise, why do it?
That's a big day when you go in for your strike zone screening, right? It's something you better get that right. Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm all for it. I think, there's just so much at stake in any given game. There's really no need to have missed calls if the technology exists, and even if it's not perfect, it's still going to be better, I assume, than the 10% or so of missed call rates that umpires have today. And it's, of course, a tough job. And I used to be for a fully automated zone, or for all pitches, but the challenge system does seem more compelling, and I like the idea of I would assuming this comes to fruition at some point. We'll see how it goes this spring, but assuming this comes to fruition in future years, I would like to see the K box removed from telecasts. So when you're at home, you're sort of playing along, and if so, you're challenging along with the batter, right? Where was that a strike? Was that a ball? I think it was. It would be nice for the audience not to know, but to the general point, I'm all for the automated zone. Let's make the game a little more accurate if the technology exists.
I'm curious in this idea of the full robot strike zone versus the challenge. What Major League Baseball says, at least publicly, is that the technology isn't there enough to sort of stand up to a full automated strike zone. They don't, and also they'll say their fan research says that people like challenges. They don't like the idea of a robot fully taking over. For both, let's just say we get to a point where the technology is perfect. It'll never be perfect, but basically as infallible as we could ever expect. Does that change your view on how this should go? Or do we say this challenge system, there's some benefit to it, even if it still will not lead to a perfect strike zone?
It's a good question. I think that is there enough benefit to it? Travis seems to be fully on board to say that there is. For that reason, I think I like the idea of the challenge system, which I understand it. If you challenge and it's right, you get to keep more challenges. It's not like you only have 3 challenges
if you're right, 9 innings. Yeah, if you're right, you could have unlimited challenges as long as you're not wrong. I think more than twice. It seems to be what they're testing in spring training.
I see. Okay,
is my understanding.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I've gotten used to. I think maybe people overrate a little bit the newness of framing, because I seem to remember 30 years, 40 years ago, catchers trying to grab strikes. It isn't like it is now, but that's become a part of the game, and I like that part of the game. And if you have automated umpires, presumably you couldn't fool them anymore, if fool is the right verb. And so I would like to have that still as part of the thing. I'm not turned off at all by trying to grab a strike. I'm just because I'm used to it. So I think the challenge system allows for that to still be in play, as I understand things.
Yeah, and to be clear, I've become a proponent of the challenge versus the full automated zone, just because of the aspect of what happens at a catcher position if you went to a fully automated zone. If framing, which we know is incredibly valuable defensively, if that is completely gone, then would teams be compelled to just put a second DH behind the plate? You only care about the run control game? So I think there could be unintended consequences of what the game looks like if you go to a fully automated zone from the catching defensive perspective, and also just the entertainment value of seeing, a batter challenge a pitch, and again, go at home watching, challenging along. There's an entertainment value there too, I think, that doesn't exist in a fully automated zone. And I think just getting rid of the egregious calls is the most beneficial, the biggest benefit to go into some sort of robo-ump. So yeah, I think we'll get there soon, and the challenge system would be, I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch.
What I like about the challenge system is there's this great strategy to it, right? It actually does introduce this sort of interesting element of strategy. And if you guys talk to minor leaguers that did it last year, they'll tell you that every minor league team had their own sort of rules for when you were allowed to challenge, what situations, because players are emotional, right? And you have to make this challenge immediately. That is the rule. It's not like you get to think about it, you don't get to review it. You have to make that decision in the moment. And they have to go tell these players who are super competitive, you have to use your head. You can't waste your challenge on a 1-0 fastball that you thought was out of the zone. And it's what I understand, teams have their own little rules about it, and they would talk about it. And it becomes this question, like, is this the right moment? And are these players, so they can't come from the bench. It can only come from pitcher, catcher, hitter in the heat of the moment, in the heat of competition, are they able to sort of make the right decisions? I think it's just like kind of fun. And it also sort of strikes at this sort of broader question of, what is the goal here? Is the goal perfect sort of umpiring? Or are we sort of comfortable with the idea that there's a human fallibility to umpires and that's just sort of part of the game? I think people have very different opinions on this. Like my opinion on this has changed over time. I used to be a real like hard proponent of we need to bring replay into baseball. And I've become like increasingly anti-replay to the point where like my ideal replay world now would be umpires get 30 seconds to look at the replay. And if they can't tell right away, you move on. Sort of what Travis was saying. The goal is to let's make sure we turn over the like egregious mistakes that every single person in the stadium knows is wrong instantly. But I don't think everyone else shares that view. I think but there is always this question of like, what do we want perfection? Is that the goal? Or are we accepting, umpires are just sort of another group of human beings on the field and they may or may not have a role in deciding the outcome.
Yeah.
Well, I think, sorry, Travis.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've never liked the process part of replay where the manager's holding up the game and looking back at the video guy who's giving a thumbs up. That's not the spirit of replay. It should be, what did your eyes see? And do you think you're challenging what the umpire saw? So there shouldn't be it should be very quick. It should be, you're just testing you're challenging what you saw in real time, and you're not relying on any video feedback and that sort of thing. So yeah, to your point, Jared, I think just having it be the actors on the field makes it more compelling too. And maybe that would overhaul all of replay, I would hope, just how the challenge goes.
Dave, I'm curious.
Travis,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Travis made a good point about not taking the box off the screen. Even though I've become addicted to it and I would miss it. And I'd be like, when we can't, sometimes when Fox has those games and it's very faint, and I'm like, where's the box? But
need that box.
We
do put a lot of faith in that box as viewers, don't we?
That we shouldn't, probably.
We really put a lot of faith in that.
The game day app will still be there.
Right. There are ways. So I just think that's a good point. And the other point, Jared, you were saying about making it quick, that's also important. That's almost as important as right at some point, because then you start to change the dynamic of the game when we're sitting there waiting. And it also takes, one thing that replay is always going to kind of mess up is sort of the aesthetic of possible game-ending plays, or the whole spontaneity of things. And then, okay, so now we're waiting here for this is great, this is very entertaining, let's find out who wins, and 2 minutes later we do. So that's a part of replay. I'm not sure that we're ever gonna a part of the game that we're never going to get back 100% because we have replay. So being quick is important too.
There's one more element to this challenge thing that I think I just want to quickly talk about. Hasn't gotten as much attention, I don't think, publicly as the robot strike zone, but that's the idea of the check swing challenge system that has been tested in the minors, and MLB clearly is sort of eyeing. I find this fascinating because it really hits at this. It makes you realize that there's this fundamental question of baseball that has never really been answered, and that is, what is a swing? Like it's kind of insane to say this, but there's nothing in the rules that really say what a swing is. And it's like, how could that be? It's like sort of like the NFL, like, what is a catch? It's like, sounds like a very simple question, but for the last 150 years in baseball, like, it hasn't been. And now they're trying to do something about it and potentially define what makes for a swing. So where are you guys? What do you guys think about this idea that we might get to a world where you could actually computerize challenge a check swing, and that will be codified what that means for the first time ever, potentially?
Or we need a definition of the swing first, right? Like, what can we agree on what the swing is?
It's
I
hilarious that we
anyone
have all these
knows.
conversations about the unwritten rules of baseball. Here's like the biggest unwritten rule of all. It's like, what is a swing?
But what does it mean to break your wrists? Where'd that even come from? Like, that's not in any rule book. And everyone's been saying that for 100 years. Like, oh, he broke his wrists. All right.
It's up there with tie goes to the runner.
Yeah, it's right in that vein. Exactly.
Computer or video. I mean, somebody at some point figured out or decided that you break if your bat goes forward of the plate, then it's a swing. And I think that's like the closest thing we have to it. But then I think about that, and doesn't that depend on where you're standing in the box? Like if is that, can you be like way back in the box and have a swing that's just as much of a swing as some other guy who's standing forward in the box, but it looks like it's different because his bat is closer naturally to the front of the plate. So I don't know. We need to figure this out. At some point, the game is only 150 years old, though.
So what I understand has been tested in the minors and potentially in the majors moving forward has to do with like the bat goes over a certain degree line. 45, I don't know, let's say 45 degrees. If your bat crosses that 45-degree line, it's a swing. It's a lot of math involved, a lot of diagrams. We'll get another line. We'll get another, nice line, and they'll show the bat going across it. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think we're going to see a test of it. I think clearly they're going to see if it works, like they've been doing in the minor. They clearly are interested in this.
Yeah, why not? Why not experiment? And we'll see some interesting replays. And it's like the quarterback tuck rule, right? Who can't get enough of those replays in the NFL?
Right. It is true too. You do see, those calls are always it always feels like to me with those check swing calls that the umpire is like not really paying attention. Suddenly someone points at him, he just goes, ball, strike, like, don't worry, I'll pick you up on the next one. Like
I've always wanted to give some truth serum to a third base umpire and be like, how often are you really locked in on that check swing?
Are you really paying attention now? Right. It does feel like sometimes they're just like, oh, me? You know what? I need, okay.
It also seems like the players can't decide on the etiquette of how to ask an umpire, did he swing? Didn't he swing? And they get into arguments over, you didn't let me point, or I don't know.
I also like when the umpires will sometimes point very emphatically and sometimes lackadaisically perfunctory. Like, all right. It's like they're kind of tipping their hand too with how they point down.
You better call this a strike. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Buddy.
So I think these are very interesting, and these are rules that we're going to see. I would be shocked if there is no ball strike challenge system in place by 2026. It just seems very clear that baseball wants it, and this test in spring training is more like, hey guys, get used to it. It's coming, barring some real catastrophic failure. I don't see them not pursuing it. I think it clearly is coming. So there's that. That's the ball strikes. That's the strike. So I think that's coming more imminently. I think we should bring our attention to something that we talked about before this. Go back to the COVID era. A lot of weird rules were put in place during COVID. Many of them have gone away. No more 7-inning doubleheaders. Thankfully, I was never a fan of that. But one COVID era rule has remained, and that's everyone's favorite extra inning ghost runner, which, by the way, it's not really a ghost runner. When I was a child and you had ghost runners, that means there was no one actually there. You had to imagine the runner was on base and make decisions as if there was a runner there. In this, there's actually a person there. There's not really a ghost runner, but that's neither here nor there. So that has stuck around, and there's no sign of it going away. I think it remains pretty controversial. How do you guys feel about the way baseball games are decided after 9 innings in the modern post-COVID world?
There's nothing I hate more in this world than how baseball games are decided after the 9th inning. It's like, hey, let's spin this roulette wheel to figure out who wins. I mean, maybe it isn't quite that bad, but I exaggerate only slightly. It just becomes something less than baseball or other than baseball when you get to the last inning. And rather than just me rail on that forever, I think we need at least one extra inning of regular baseball before we go to whatever's next. And I don't really understand why they didn't do that in the first place. But I'd like one extra inning to decide, and then maybe we can later in the discussion talk about what comes after that.
What do you think, Travis?
Maybe it's a bias from my old beat writing days and wanting to be home before 2 a.m. But I like the so-called ghost runner just for a few reasons. One is a practical one. With we all know about the injuries in the game and how pitching staffs are always tested, and I just don't think 14-inning games are really helping or doing the game or pitchers a service or just the quality of game the next day and deeper into a series, that sort of thing. And just knowing that the game is going to be concentrated in a tighter window for the median spectator, I think it helps you stay more engaged where, okay, there's going to be a decision, there's going to be a conclusion point soon. So I hear David's point about it isn't baseball. It's a little different. It's like college football overtime or something that removes some fundamental aspects of the game. But from I guess I care a lot about entertainment value. So from the entertainment value and from just practical, keeping pitchers better rested, better healthy, less extended, I like it from those aspects. So I was sort of on the fence about it, rather ambivalent, but I've grown to like it.
I think I'm somewhere in between you guys, which I'm glad that we don't all agree about everything. I think that's good. I agree entirely with Travis in that very long games. I don't mean time of game, that's a separate question. These long inning games, these like 15, 16 inning games they serve nobody. They are simply not good because they do not benefit anyone. Nobody is watching them anymore because it's too late at night. All the fans have left the stadium and the teams despise them because it completely screws up their pitching. It usually requires sending some players down the next day. Like it costs people jobs because they had to play all these extra innings. And if no one's watching it and no one's at the game anymore, and the players and teams all agree they're bad, why have them? And I think that's a very like fair point. There's no one is benefiting, not one person, from a 17, 16 inning game. The first year I covered baseball, 2013, and I was covering the Mets on the beat. The Mets that year, maybe it's been broken since, but I do not think so, set an all-time major league record for most extra innings, not extra inning games, but extra innings, because they had 3 games that went like 18, 18, and 20 innings. It was like first year covering baseball. There was
Lucky you, all that bonus baseball.
It was wild. But I just remember every time thinking, there is not a soul on earth that is still watching this baseball game except for me and the other people in this press box. There's maybe like 200 people in the stands. It's like 2:00 in the morning. So no one's watching on TV. What are we doing here? I covered that 18-inning World Series game. That was a real adventure, At least that's the World Series. And I do think there's something about like at some point a game gets so long where you kind of start rooting for it never to end. It like rolls back around like, oh, extra innings, awesome, exciting. Oh, this is terrible. It's been so long. Then by inning like 17, you're kind of like, well, if we're going to do this, let's just go 40. Let's like go for history. So yeah, so I do think these long games are really bad. But I also agree with Dave in that there's just something weird about putting a runner on second base. Like I've always felt that I would like to see one extra inning that's normal. Give me one extra inning. If they still can't decide it, then like go to the next thing. Sort of like, with hockey, they play like an overtime period that sort of resembles hockey before they just jump right to the shootout. They don't go right to the shootout. You'll play, a sudden death overtime. I don't know. I think there's a balance here where it's like you don't want long games, but how do you ensure games end sooner? I think we before this we talked about one pretty radical idea. Who wants to share? Who wants to be the brave soul to alienate everybody watching with our crazy idea for how to fix this problem?
Well, I was at one of the last ones, I believe. It was. Are we going to discuss the tie game? Are we going to go there?
Yes.
Let's
bring
do
back
it.
ties.
So
Hello,
it
Chris.
was my last game as a beat writer covering the Pirates. Last game of the 2016 season, and it ended in a tie. Ivan Nova was pitching. It was neither team had anything to play for. A miserable season. I think it started raining, and they're just like, screw it, a tie game. And I know a tie is like antithetical to what baseball is, but if any sport was going to have a tie in its standings, wouldn't it be the one with the longest season, with all these games where no single game has the same meaning as a college football game, which had ties forever? NHL has its system. So from a practical standpoint, if you were designing the game from scratch today, a tie wouldn't seem like such a bad idea, and it would change. It would also be interesting in some ways in how teams played the end game, the ninth inning too. And you're saving pitchers, because we all know, again, about injury rates and usage concerns and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, I mean, I think some of us have written about it. I know I wrote a piece for Fangraphs a few years ago about it, and then the comments weren't all in favor, but it does. I think it does make some sense to consider the tie, at least at some point.
It's funny. What's funny is that I kind of question this idea that it goes against the baseballs or the spirit of baseball. I actually think, like you said, if any sport lends itself to a tie, it's baseball. Like baseball already has this sort of like languid, daily kind of like long, slow arc to it, where like, a tie, I feel like in some ways is within that spirit. What it's certainly not, though, is in sort of like the American spirit of competition. Americans like hate ties, like European sports have ties and they don't complain about it. There's something like un-American about ties. Like we need somebody to win. Am I taking this too far, Dave, or am I on to something here?
No, that was what I was going to say. I think that's if there, just to repeat a little bit, if there is a sport where tying seems kind of appropriate, it might be baseball. I mean, there's 162 of these games. As much as I live, eat, and breathe baseball and feel it and whatever, I can get bored by it to a certain extent, and just the monotony of it. And you said languid. That was a great word. Sometimes I call baseball writers in the clubhouse like professional loiterers, because there's like waiting around for nothing to happen in there too. So it's just kind of there's all kinds of little reasons that baseball just kind of goes on and on forever. And maybe it doesn't always have to. It bringing the tie in fits from the standpoint of now I don't know, like, do we give teams like credit for a half a win and a half a loss in the tie? I did a little research on this, and NPB has ties, and they used to count them in the standings as like points, like you might in a soccer match. But they don't anymore, and haven't in 60 years or 70 years. So it's, that's kind of out there too. Like, what do you do with the tie? How do you calculate it into a winning percentage? I think we'd have to figure that out. What do we want to do with that? But it would shorten the games. If we give them our one extra inning and then have ties over 162 game season, I think we can still figure out who deserves to be in the playoffs from that. I think that's okay. So, and then we wouldn't have it in the postseason. So that's short answers to those questions.
Well, hopefully we haven't alienated everybody watching with this. If we have, Nick, we're sorry. I want to talk about one more sort of like big on-field issue before we start going off the field. And now that the pace of game problem has largely been solved, or at least heavily addressed by the advent of the pitch clock, I would argue, and I think you guys might agree, the biggest issue baseball, at least on the field, is facing right now is this balance between pitching and hitting, strikeouts, balls in play, home runs, like however you sort of want, whatever lens you want to look at it. It's ultimately this idea that are there too few balls in play? Are there too many home runs and too many strikeouts? Whatever it is. I think it's a legitimate topic, and it has a lot of tentacles, right? It has to do with it has to do with pitcher usage. It has to do with approach to hitting. It has to do with a lot of different things. Let's just start here. One, for both of you, is this something that baseball needs to address, or are we happy with this is the way baseball's gone, and we're going to be in a 3-2 outcome game, and there's nothing wrong with that? Am I just being crazy for saying it's potentially a problem?
Short answer for me, I don't know. I'm not, and I'd actually like to hear what Travis says about this. I guess my only thing is we talk about how we go about fixing this. And the question I keep getting back to is, how do we expect to ask the pitchers to stop throwing as hard as they can, as often as they can, which seems to be the issue? How do we, no matter what we do, how do we move the mound back, raise the mound, whatever, deaden the ball? How do we get them to do that? And should we expect them to do that? So does it become a thing where I don't know if this is fixable exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, Dave. It's hard to, the incentives are all pointing one way. It's to throw harder, it's to hit the ball in the air, it's to increase your bat speed. And I don't see what kind of natural market forces would change those incentives. It's just like the 3-point game in the NBA. The math is pretty simple, and that's the most efficient shot. There's the most efficient way to pitch generally and to hit in baseball. So I don't see how that would naturally correct. But then there's the concern, and I don't know if like the NBA TV ratings decline this year's tied to this, their sort of 3 outcome like issue with the 3-pointer. But there is the other, does it have to be a rules change then that would address this or reduce the 3 true outcomes? And a lot of it comes back to, I think, the velocity off the mound, and I guess it's a related subject, but MLB had its first, they had their first sort of injury report that came out in December, and what's causing the injuries and what can we do about it. And their experts were saying the only thing that can really change this, incentives aren't going to change on their own. So it would have to be some sort of rule change. And that's why we've seen reports of MLB discussing like the 6-inning minimum for starting pitchers and those things being floated. And we can talk about whether that's too extreme or not. But I do think to address some of these issues, it's not going to occur naturally. It's just going to keep inching towards the percentage of strikeouts, walks, home runs will keep increasing and innings will keep being reduced by pitchers unless there's some sort of rule in place to, but we're adding a lot of legislation today, but that's what I think a rules change is the only thing that would sort of change course of these trends we see.
Well, the thing is, we talk about the pitch clock as being radical, but I actually disagree. The pitch clock was actually sort of a dream for MLB. It was something they were able to put in that had an enormous impact, but really didn't change anything. Like it had made no real change on how the game is played. It just made pitchers like stop dawdling and sort of made them go back to what pitchers used to, which is get the ball and throw it. But to fix this, it's going to require much sort of bigger, they really need to put their hands in. Like to change this, they're going to need to make much bigger, much more invasive, I think is the word, changes. I'm not saying they shouldn't or should, but it's going to require that. Something that changes the entire incentive structure in baseball. And like they have reasons for wanting to do this, right? And it kind of is two-pronged. You have this issue of like just balls in play. And I'm sure MLB would tell you their fan research says that people prefer when balls are put in play. And they like when, every at bat isn't 8 pitches with 6 foul balls. Travis wrote a really good piece, just this week about sort of the rise in foul balls in baseball and how the increase in foul balls, how that's impacting the game. I think that was a really astute point. But there's also this issue of like bringing the starting pitcher back to prominence, right? I think baseball likes to phrase it as making the starting pitcher the protagonist again of the game, right? You kind of kill two birds with one stone by addressing this. You kind of fix both of those things at once. But how do you do it? And it's going to require something very big, something like a 6-inning minimum, for starting pitchers. Something like we're going to require teams, they can't have more than 7 pitchers on their roster. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying. Like, it's going to require direct intervention that's going to change the way baseball is played. And I think I think increasingly they're wondering if it's time to do that. But I think that's what it's going to take, because the market forces will never, ever, that's not going to change. In fact, that's only going to get worse. The push to throw harder and to spin the ball more is just going to continue to grow unless we change the paradigm to where we are incentivizing not velocity and spin, but durability, right? Like, there was a time when starting pitchers, what did they do? They would pace themselves. They would hold stuff back. I have to go 8-9 innings today. Now we are training pitchers from birth to be 5 and dive. Go as hard as you can on every single pitch. And don't worry, there's going to be 6 other guys that throw 100 behind you. You could change that incentive, but it's going to require, I think, as we said, a lot. It requires a big change. And I don't know if people have the stomach for something like that.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because we've all watched, and I think most people that whoever's listening to this or watching, they've watched baseball long enough to know that there are also other things in a baseball game that happen that make something like you must pitch 6 innings today really an unpleasant possible rule change. I mean, there's all kinds of things the pitcher doesn't have it in short. You want to change pitchers. There's still something about you're giving the manager certainly one less thing to do, I guess, for the first 2/3 of the game. There have been, before we had this crisis, there were lots of reasons to want to be able to take out your pitcher whenever you wanted to. And I think there's something to that in a game. And I think, too, kind of related to this, we want to, the idea is to reward durability and lessen the incentive for throwing that heck out of the ball as much as you can. But you don't want to completely get rid of that. I mean, you don't want to just have durable pitchers. You don't want everybody to pitch like a 5th starter. You want to have degrees. You want to have differences. You want to have, a Justin Verlander at the beginning of the rotation and a Rick Porcello in the middle and a Milt Wilcox at the end. You want to have a guy who, you want there somehow to be value in the guy who doesn't throw 100 miles an hour, but you don't want to get rid of the guy who throws 100 miles an hour necessarily. So this has, to me, lots of potential for be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I think invasive was a great word choice, Jared, and to just be any dramatic rules change would have so many fallout factors, a lot of unintended consequences. It just, I know there's a lot of folks in the game that want no part of some 6-inning minimum, and the game's not even equipped for that right now. As you look at the amount of minor league arms that reached 150 innings last year, I think fits on one search page or less than it, like a Fangraphs. So, and the amateur game, of course, is all geared towards velocity hunting, spin hunting. So it's just not even equipped for a 6-inning rule or anything. You would have to have a long runway leading into that for people to train differently and incentivize differently. I thought the double hook rule is kind of compelling, where your pitcher's tied at a DH. That would help get some length. I don't know if lowering the mound or, I hate changing the ball every year. Let's not, let's not do that.
The ball years those were not fun years to be writing about in baseball.
Yeah. Even 2 different balls. Some games have one ball, some games have another, apparently.
Yeah. But there is something I was speaking with Brian Bannister, the great White Sox pitching coach, last spring. And I mean, he's at the forefront of a lot of the modern pitching design, modern training regimen. He's all about adjutronic cameras. He's all about that. But he also misses the the idea of the protagonist. He misses seeing a pitcher try to navigate a lineup a third time and not seeing that very often. And he thinks, that is a negative for the game. And, he helped Logan Webb in San Francisco. And there's a pitcher who is getting by through not velocity, but movement and harnessing seam shifted wake. And he is able to go deeper into games, record 200 innings. So maybe there's just development stuff too, where there could be more Logan Webbs or more guys can learn how to pitch like that. But he seems to be an outlier. And we see the max. I mean, we can look at the max, the gap between max and min velocity for each pitcher over the last, the PitchFX StatCast era. It keeps shrinking, which suggests that the max effort is only going to continue. So it really all comes back to that for the most part. It's complicated.
It is very complicated. Well, we will see where that goes. We got about 15 minutes left. I do want to talk a little bit about some of these off-field rule changes. I think this is also going to, be get a little controversial. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Baseball. I think the story of baseball this offseason has been the Dodgers, right? And the never-ending questions: are the Dodgers good for baseball? Are they bad for baseball? Are they good for baseball? Are they bad for baseball? Everyone's got their opinion, and it's also just kind of a weird question. Like, it's not as simple as good for or bad for, but it's how we like to sort of characterize things. But the reality is this: the Los Angeles Dodgers have spent an unbelievable amount of money this offseason. The New York Mets, who are owned by a man who has more money than God, spent $750 million or whatever on Juan Soto. These are two teams. They're very different. The market forces around them are different. But at the end of the day, they are both spending incredible amounts of money on players. And I think a lot of fans of other teams, Travis, you might be in a city of some fans that feel this way as we speak, that they just simply can no longer compete. That the Dodgers are going to have a payroll of $370 million this year, and it's going to be like $300 million more than the lowest payroll and like $100 million more than the next highest payroll. And how could you have a sport where you have that kind of financial disparity, which of course is going to lead to the inevitable questions that comes up every 5 years when they go to collective bargaining about those two dirty words, salary cap. Baseball does not have a salary cap. It's the only sport that doesn't. The 1994 strike was over the ownership's attempt to bring a salary cap. We have had owners get a little more bold this offseason talking about their desire for one. David Rubenstein with the Orioles saying baseball should have a salary cap. You had Hal Steinbrenner saying publicly that owners cannot compete with what the Dodgers are doing. I think they're showing what they are thinking. Gentlemen, what do we make of the Dodgers and where do we go from here?
Well, I think the Dodgers, the Dodgers are usually one of the bigger spenders in the league, but I think we could also agree that they've kind of stepped it up here in the last few years, and didn't always just spend X dozens of millions on whoever came on the free agent market. But what they have been doing is putting a lot of money and resources into player development and developing their own talent from the minor leagues. And I think that's certainly one thing that they do well that other teams, that it's good for baseball. It's a good example of here. This is kind of how you do it. And that's something that all teams definitely should be able to afford, but don't necessarily do. And I'm also one of these people that, they're all billionaires. They could all spend more money than they do. They choose not to. I think that's true. Should there be a salary cap? Now, if it takes away, if it keeps more money just in the hands of the owners and keeps it out of the players, I don't know how that benefits me as a fan. Kind of one thing I'd like to see is something that we'll absolutely probably never see. And that is, first of all, the owners and the players agreeing on, what's revenue and what's cost and all that. And the owners can't even really agree among themselves. They don't trust each other with this information, who's making what. And I'd like to see like a two-tiered system where you put all the money in baseball into a pot, And maybe you have a salary cap for what you can spend on players, but then like the rest of the revenue, hopefully it's all above board, goes into another pool where it ultimately it gets divided up 50-50 or whatever the owners and players agree on. And it's like aftermarket, players get the money at some point, just so, Randy Levine and Hal Steinbrenner aren't making more money than Aaron Judge. I mean, I would rather the money went to the ball players. And I understand how it could be fairer for Kansas City, Cleveland, whatever, to compete so they don't have to, but if we could also get a system where the players get half and the owners get half, then I would be okay with a salary cap, and not until then. So good luck on that pipe dream, Dave. But
What do you think, Travis?
So much to unpack here.
I know this is a big question to answer in 10 minutes. We're not going to.
Yeah.
We'll do our best.
I'll try not to take up all 10 minutes.
I'm talking about this.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, baseball, just because of the nature of the game, that there's no Patrick Mahomes who takes every snap in the postseason for his team. No starting pitchers like a quarterback or NBA star. There's just, when you have multiple rounds of playoffs in a game designed to be played over a large sample, played in a small sample, you're going to have parity. So you could argue the expanded playoffs is enough parity. And no one star dominates the sport like football or basketball. So there is no need for a salary cap and that sort of thing. But I think ultimately it's more of a perception issue. And the perception, if you're in most markets as a fan, is that the game is unfair, the financial playing field is unfair. And then when you have a team like the Dodgers that's executing at everything, scouting, player development, and then they add in superstar free agent, then it just seems unfair, even if they have a coin flip chance of losing in a LDS series. And I think it would benefit the game greatly to have all markets involved in an offseason where everyone's involved in some level of free agency. I don't think we're close to getting a true salary cap, but if there's just a floor, something to incentivize spending, just have more teams like every other sport making trades. This idea of hope is like the ultimate drug in sports. And if you have more fan bases, more teams involved in the offseason, I think that would be huge for the sport. And yeah, these owners are all super rich. Most of them are billionaires. But I looked at, it wasn't a perfect study, but I looked at, Sportico's revenues by team and spending. And really all these guys, I think when you're asking billionaire owners to spend more, you're sort of arguing for human nature to change. And most of these guys spend about the same, within the same band or range of their revenues on payroll. And really only Steve Cohen is an outlier in this. He's the only one who's just like, I will spend whatever. And he's in a large market too. So you have this human nature where most of these guys are not going to spend at a loss. They're going to spend within a certain range. We have the perception issue. And I also think the system, even though salary cap, the union doesn't want to hear it, most players have no interest, but this system really only benefits the top 2% of players or so. I mean, you think of MLB as the lowest median pay among all the major sports in North America. Very few players ever reach arbitration, let alone free agency. I mean, the median player outcome is probably 2.5 years of service and you're gone. And you also went up through the minor leagues and that pay and that sort of thing too. So even the current system isn't that, with no salary ceiling, it's not beneficial to 98% of players really. So there's a lot going on here, but I do think certainly some floor, which is hard to arrive at without a cap, I suppose, or some great incentive to force more teams to be active and fight the human nature of owners not wanting to spend is would be great for the game, because just seeing most teams sit out the offseason isn't great. I mean, the Guardians were a playoff team last year, and they've traded a Platinum Glove winner. They traded their cleanup hitter. That's not really compelling. If you're why would you want to invest in that as a fan? So it's a big topic, and we'll see where it goes.
It's a very big topic, and it's also a topic that I think that sort of it elicits a lot of emotion from people, and I don't think that either extreme position on this is really being totally intellectually honest with themselves. I agree with Dave. I think it's like you're not going to be able to sit here and tell me that Miami or Cleveland or whoever could not spend more than they do. Pittsburgh. Where you always end up, Travis, in the places where this is the big issue. Pittsburgh, Cleveland. That said, I think we have to sort of look at what's happening in baseball. And the ranks of ownership is changing. Yes, every owner is a billionaire. Steve Cohen is like a 30 billionaire. And I don't think that most people truly are like able to comprehend the difference between 1 billion and 30 billion. Like it is enormous. Like there was no scenario where any team was going to outbid Steve Cohen for Juan Soto. It could not be done because you are bidding against a man that has no ceiling. Hal Steinbrenner has a ceiling. Why does Hal Steinbrenner have a ceiling? Because at the end of the day, for as much as they're worth and for as lucrative as they are, the Yankees are a family business. The Steinbrenners have no other business. They don't make ships anymore. Hal Steinbrenner's money is in the Yankees and the Yankee business. So he's sitting on this asset that might be worth $7 billion, but he doesn't have that money. I'm not saying he's not making tons. He doesn't have tons of revenue coming in. He does. I'm not saying he doesn't. But Steve Cohen does not have to run the Mets anything like a business. He has said this himself. He could run it like philanthropy. He has $1 billion of other wealth coming in from his hedge fund every year. The Dodgers have the weight of Guggenheim behind it, right? This giant financial services firm that is managing untold billions of dollars. And that is very different than even someone like Steinbrenner, let alone some of these other smaller, the DeWitts or the Nuttings or the Castellinis. It's a different breed of owner. And it makes you start thinking what kind of person will really be able to own sports teams in the future? Is private equity going to be involved? We're not going to answer all these questions. But I do think I just do think it's more complicated than all the owners are billionaires. They are all billionaires by virtue of owning an asset that is worth $1 billion, at least, unquestionably. But I'm not sure that tells the entire story of what is happening. And we should probably do a whole other panel on this topic
next year.
Next year. Exactly.
It'd be great if there are 30 Steve Cohens all competing against each other. But
right. Every team would love to have a Steve Cohen. It would be great for the game. And you would not need to worry at all about sort of the economic system of every team had a Steve Cohen. There aren't really that many Steve. There is Steve Cohen in Cleveland. There like a Steve Cohen just waiting to jump in and buy the Guardians.
That's a great point, though. I mean, his liquid wealth is probably X times greater than the total asset wealth of most other owners in baseball. I mean, like to your point, most of what these guys own they're not sitting on necessarily $1 billion in cash. They own stuff, and it's just not as simple as I have $1 billion in my wallet and I'm not spending it.
No, I'm not. Right.
Only Steve Cohen has that problem.
Yeah, and the Dodgers, they're also the Dodgers' revenues are so high, and their TV deal and Ohtani and everything else. Baseball loves to say that most teams or all teams are of this break-even business. And that is always disputed. The union will dispute that till the cows come home. I think fans dispute it. I think it's valid to dispute it because, they're break-even businesses if you look at the books a certain way, but then there's this revenue and this revenue. And like Dave was saying, there's always this question of are we really getting a full picture? However, I do think that this idea that, these owners are just sort of raking in billions or all this money in cash every year. It may be truer than I think a lot of fans think. Now, owners are making money. Franchise valuations are always going up. These guys are doing fine. But when baseball says these teams are breaking even cash flow most years, I'm not saying they're 100% telling the truth, but I don't think either they're like, they're secretly have $500,000 in cash coming in that no one knows about. So maybe I should leave it there before I say anything I'll regret.
The only thing I would add is, are you trying to win? Are you trying to win a World Series, or are you trying to make the best possible deal? And I think you can't necessarily do both to the same degree. I think too many teams are trying to get value on players rather than trying to add the best players. And I think you can do that. Not everybody's going to get Juan Soto. I guess not everybody can afford him. I don't know. But you can you can do things to degrees more than they're doing.
Yes, I do agree. What is it? What was John Middleton's now famous quote, or Andrew Friedman, I guess? What did he say? If you're rash on every free agent, you're gonna finish third on every free agent, or whatever he said, something like that. It's very, very true. And I do believe that there are teams out there that are so devoted to this idea that like win per dollar, win per dollar, win per dollar, that just stops them from signing free agents. They're not willing to extend themselves a little bit to do it. Like look at the Orioles with Corbin Burns, for example, right?